prototyping. Today, I'm just going to go through what it is, what it isn't, why you want to do it, some of the basic benefits of testing. Hopefully, it becomes easier and more part of how you think through other aspects of your work. So approachable in that way, and then thinking about how you can do it with these projects. And I'll leave you with some worksheets, but again, no pressure to use them in full. I brought this over from last year because around this time, well, at this time in our sessions, we had just been sent home from the pandemic. And so it was very much in the spirit of pivoting, Ideastarter, talking about prototyping. But the spirit of prototyping is so that you can really feel comfortable with shifting when things don't work. It's all about answering questions that you have, or assumptions that you have, or things that you think that you know, and you find out might not actually be true. But that's a good thing in prototyping. So you have this idea, you wanted to bring it into the world, and the key to the test is really refining that based on actual feedback. And so it's an iterative process that you can embed into your development. And basically, prototypes help us understand all those outstanding questions, those assumptions that we're coming in with, either validating those assumptions or invalidating them. And then you can have data to back it up instead of just, more assumptions. So first you have to understand what you want to know. And then once you have your good questions ready, you create the prototype to address those gaps in knowledge. And so the key to that is making it tangible. It's more than talking about it, more than sending emails back and forth. It's more than having a Word document with your notes. It's, it doesn't have to be a piece of art, as you'll see, but it really is like, can I touch it? Can I interact with it? Can someone else experience it in a way that is helping answer those questions that I have? And so feedback first and foremost, you're testing your assumptions, you're going in with your hypotheses. It's really just like a scientific method in that way. You're learning new insights. And so even when you're validating assumptions that you have, if you're not learning anything new, you might want to pause and actually check, am I asking the right questions, or am I just looking to validate things that I hope are true? All of this is really just an effort also to save time and money and ultimately reduce risk, because all of these time is precious, money is valuable, all of that stuff. So it's really going to help you move towards the right intervention and not just full speed ahead towards the direction that you want to go because you think that you're saving time. Because as we know, we probably all have an example of a big move that we thought was right. We tried to push forward, and maybe it could have actually saved us some effort at the end by taking a different approach, more of a prototype approach. And so ultimately, we want to build something that people actually need and want and use. So prototypes are all about helping us get there. So starting with that question that we want to learn. And I'll say that you can prototype from many different aspects. So it's not just like one big prototype. You can just bring it in. Don't try to eat the whole elephant. You take one bite at a time. And so just focus in on one question at a time, one or two questions at a time with these tests, because you want to think about who you want to learn it from, who you need to get those answers from. And sometimes when you try to throw the kitchen sink into your prototype, you don't exactly know what you're learning and you get lost in the sauce. And so once you have a good question and you're starting to think through about what will be a valuable kind of answer to get or responses, you're going to just go in with the lowest fidelity that you can probably get away without spending a lot of time, money, energy making, and getting a response. And so on the right here, there's just an example of what a low fidelity can look like, a medium fidelity and a high fidelity. And these are the, an app sort of version of prototypes. So these can take out all different kinds of forms, but basically, what's the quickest and easiest and cheapest thing that you can create and still learn what you need to learn? Because ultimately you're going to break it, and you're just going to repeat this process until you feel like you're confident in moving forward to scaling up that prototype or investing more of your resources into that solution. And these are just any number of examples that you can think of as prototyping tools, from sketching for yourself, diagrams, storyboards, physical materials like, toys, Legos, clay. If you ever seen an architect make paper models, it's obviously a really easy thing to imagine as far as prototype goes before you make the real thing, invest in the bricks. Role playing, so if it's situational, sort of taking on how an experience feels. And so there's these exploratory, more of that early in the process, like trying to understand within maybe my internal team of what we're trying to do here. And so on the left here is a mind map. And it's, even this is just a visual, it's getting out of your head and making it something more tangible, and being able to create connections that you can't do when it's just floating in the abyss. The second one here is a storyboard, and then here's more of a model, clay model example. At the bottom here is experiential prototypes. And so this is something maybe you want to bring a user into and start to see how they might begin to interact with something. In the bottom here, you can imagine they're making a web application, and they're having someone go through and tell them, like, what steps did you take? Backpack, how does it feel? How does it sit on your back? And this sort of maybe the role playing of, I don't know, this looks like maybe an ATM or some kind of experience like that, where the designer can observe. If you've been making your journey maps, you're already prototyping. And so I mentioned a number of you already have started prototyping. You have really good questions, and you're pretty primed and ready to begin getting answers around those assumptions that you have. I was considering having a little breakout session, but I think I'm just going to today talk through a little bit of the storyboard as opposed to having us go through this today. It's kind of a bummer because in the prototyping session is really nice to have in person, because we can actually practice all these tools and it without feeling like we're on, overloaded with screen time. But a storyboard is a really nice, simple sort of comic strip way of representing your idea. And so each square, sort of like your journey map, is going to represent a single shot. And Dan said he's all ready for an in-person meeting. We can talk about that. So it shows a storyboard shows who and what is in the scene, what's being said, and any other interaction activity. Again, sort of like your journey map. And so sometimes for people, this is actually an easier or better way for them to think through the journey map, because they can just paint more of that picture of how something might look. And you're not just typing it with words. So as you read through the storyboard, you should be able to, see the video playing in your head. I also want to differentiate between a prototype and a pilot. It's not always super clear, but there are differences that I think are worth mentioning, especially because organizationally, a pilot brings a certain connotation to it, and a prototype is really the pre-pilot work that you should do before you pilot something. It's those early tests. It's like the scrappy stuff that no one necessarily even needs to officially know about. It's the feedback on pieces of the early versions of the idea. So you're not testing like a smaller version, you're taking sort of parts of that before you build the whole thing together. And failing is really a key part of the goal. So when you fail with a prototype, it doesn't always feel great, but you can at least rest assured that you're breaking it. That's part of the goal of a prototype. By the time you get to a pilot, that really is a smaller scale test of your, quote unquote, final idea, once you have a really good sense of how it should work operationally. And so all of those parts that you've prototyped, you've put them together, and now the rubber hits the road in a different way where you're like, okay, hopefully this runs. If it doesn't, it's still a pilot and you're here to learn, but failing is not like, you're not aiming to fail at this point. You're hoping to succeed so that you can scale from there. So from here, that actually really went pretty quickly. This is the prototype planning worksheet that I'm hoping will help you think through some questions and thoughts if you haven't already begun to do this. So over here on the left side, number 1, identify the assumptions that you made in developing your idea. So everyone came in to Ideastarter with an idea. Maybe you were really passionate about making this specific thing and bringing it to life. Maybe you had more questions and weren't sure if this was exactly the right solution. Wherever you were on that scale, there's things that you know, and there are things that you think you know. So the things that you know, those are the facts, the data, the like literal observed behavior that informed this idea. The things that you think you know are those assumptions and the hypotheses that really need to be brought into question. And so it's both of these gold boxes are the things that are primed for prototyping. Once you think about how you might validate or invalidate your assumptions, if these are, if this is something that you can accomplish with some desk research or just some interviews, do that. But if these are testable assumptions, meaning you need to build something, put it in front of someone, not necessarily take their word for it. Like when you're sometimes in an interview, it's like you can ask someone how they're going to interact with something. Is that a better idea than actually just watching them interact with something? So it's sort of that balance of what's really worth testing. And then I brought these 5 E's back, because when you have that journey map of your current experience, that's another way of finding where are your biggest questions or assumptions that could make or break your idea. If I have a lot of questions around what engagement looks like or what that entry point looks like, I should probably focus in my prototype and answering those questions first. So this is where you can begin to just note some of your assumptions, and I can look at the worksheets, just an easy place for me to tap into. An example here of some top assumptions is people will sign up to volunteer. So this is obviously an idea where you need to have like participant engagement, and community members will care about this. Okay, so it's something that's facing the public that I'm just making an assumption that people are going to want to use. On the right side here, we're going to translate those questions into things that we can actually investigate with the prototype. So that you decide what those questions and how you frame them are, because as always, the way that we frame the question determines, how we're making our prototype and like what kind of answer we're looking for. So how will people sign up to volunteer? So like that's more of a logistics thing. What motivates people to volunteer? That's maybe more of a behavioral science aspect. And then thinking about what barriers exist to signing up to volunteer. Are those logistics? Are those motivations? Are those other aspects that we might not know about? And thinking about how we can minimize them as much as possible. So those community members that we're assuming will care, well, who are those community members? What matters to them in general? And how is this solution going to impact their life? So this can go on, and these are examples. I encourage you to look back at your problem statements and the learnings that you're gleaning from those stakeholder interviews, and because all of those things are meant to bring you to this point. So once you have one solid testing question that you're particularly interested in, you bring it into this stage of just thinking about what would be the best way to start testing that idea. So these are just basically different kinds of prototype ideas that you can use. Again, some of it's maybe an interactive demo. You might wireframe an idea out. You could do some role playing. A service journey is basically like the journey map. You can begin sharing that with other stakeholders. So wherever you're at, we can talk more about what that looks like for you. What aspect of the idea are you trying to represent and why? So these are the places that I don't necessarily need you to elaborate in the box. It's good to keep in mind, and if it's helpful to write it down, then I encourage you to do so. And so just thinking about what resources are needed, people, what skills and what roles are involved in that prototype. What parts of the process do you need to think through when you're testing? Technology needed, any kind of logistics around making this run. Again, these are sort of reflective nudges. I'm going to walk through the rest of this, but know that those first 2 pages are really probably the most important for you to think through. So this is just a plan for you to, especially if you're working with a team, so you can just sort of keep accountable to who are you bringing in to engage? Where are you going to test if you're not doing it, remotely? Is it site specific, and is it important to be able to observe in person? Again, it's your call. We're kind of in this awkward spot with COVID. So I built this assuming that we'd mainly keep it remote, but I'm leaving it up to your choice. What data will you collect, and how will you collect it? So just thinking about quantitative data, qualitative data. Are you looking for the number of people showing up to something that you're creating, or taking maybe a survey around how people are receiving the idea? You can do a focus group. There are different ways of collecting either the numbers or the experiences around what those results look like. And again, I can talk with each of you and your mentors to see what's the most useful way to address that. We'll also be touching more on metrics a bit later. I just didn't want to pull it all into one mega session. You can begin to think about what do you think is going to happen when you test this? What are you looking for when you think this? Okay, this validated my assumptions, or what would invalidate your assumptions? So sort of just articulating, getting out on paper, what would make or break this particular question for you. This is just more space for you to write. So that's where I leave this. Over the next couple weeks, it would be great if you don't engage with these worksheets, at least begin thinking more about your prototypes. I'll be checking in with you, and I'm going to stop screen sharing so I can see all of the black screens. And Sean, I know you've seen those worksheets before, but I'd be curious if you, well, first, if anyone has any questions or thoughts or concerns, but also, since Sean, you were the only one I think that was around last year, it'd be great to hear if you have any thoughts or things that you feel like I missed or blew over too quickly.
I'm happy to talk, but yeah, I think the question of whether people have questions is important. So I think that is a no. I think the piece that I would say is, I guess I have a couple of thoughts, and Katie and I were just talking about prototyping. I think the first thing is, when you see all these slides and it's like I think Shannon's providing you with lots of ideas of how you could prototype, like what aspects of projects you would prototype and stuff like that. And I know for me, I think it ends up feeling overwhelming because you realize like, oh snap, there's actually all these different things that I could prototype. And so I think it kind of, I got stuck at that point because I was like, okay, what should I prototype? So I feel like if you're feeling that, that's okay. That's like totally normal. And then the other piece I would say, and again, Katie and I are just talking about it, like this is what you've been waiting for, right? This is why you did Ideastarter on some level, which is to actually begin to test your ideas. And so I kind of think about like, why did I put in for Ideastarter? What's the piece I want to test? And how does that dovetail with all the information that Shannon just gave you? And I love that she said, like, if you're not learning something, then you need to stop and figure out like, oh, what should I actually be prototyping? Because I'm like a big fan of what can you just hack together and put in front of people. And I think that that's super hard on some level because all along we're always taught like you should only present like really polished stuff. And it's like, no, I want you to present something like kind of half baked and see what type of responses you get. Because as soon as you get a response, you'll be able to be like, I know how to make it better. And, my group does a lot of like map stuff and web maps and stuff. So much of that gets built off of what we think people want. And then as soon as we put it in front of people, the stuff that we thought was just a one-off and nobody cared about is the stuff they latch on to. And the stuff we thought was super awesome, they're like, they don't need it, or they don't have any idea what it is or how to use it. And so I think you're at this place where it's super tough to push forward. And it's exactly that moment of when you need to push forward into that awkwardness, right? So
I think
those are all
next
my
year I'm going to have you lead the session, Sean.
It's because I'm always enthusiastic.
No, it's good. I appreciate, I appreciate your perspective because it is sometimes hard to, it's not the most natural. Prototyping seems very simple and straightforward, but it's a difficult thing to push forward with because I mean, the point of, in my experience, of like keeping everything sort of, behind the scenes until it's ready to present is something that is so drilled into how I was taught. And it ends up being like vulnerable in ways that sometimes if you don't feel like you have a safe space to do that, it could not be received or received as sloppy, or you could even be sort of punished for it. So there is a delicacy of like a balance of being clear about your intentions and what you're doing, being specific about what you're asking of people, and then letting them know that you are helping me build this. Like I need you to help make this better because it's not actually live yet. It's not living. And that's why I like to call things prototypes, even though I know it's not a word that everyone is super familiar or comfortable with, but pilot sometimes feels a little bit like it's got its legs already. And so you're assuming that the pilot, it's like, oh, well, it's coming soon, like it's on its way. And a prototype might be like, yeah, no, we actually decided that was a horrible idea. And so we decided to go a different way. So no one's sort of holding their breath waiting for like, well, why was I doing that with you? So that's like my long goal of this sort of mindset. Dan, what's up?
Yeah, I liked how, speaking of that, I liked how you said that like your prototype, you're almost like trying to fail, and then your pilot, you're trying to succeed, right? You said something to that effect.
Mm-hmm.
That stuck with me.
Yeah, and I think everyone here, I've actually talked with all of you pretty recently, so I have an idea of at least how you're thinking about prototyping or getting to that point. So if you don't have specific questions now, or you want to ask them later, I'm good with whatever you guys need. I'm just looking at the screens and seeing if you have any questions. Otherwise, that's all I have for today. And I'm looking forward to working more with you. You can either put something on my calendar or just email me. Lisa, I know you like Teams, so I'm like trying to check my Teams more often because I don't always get notified. But and I have that survey that I would love. I know I got a few responses, so thank you if you wrote something. I'm really excited to look at what people have to say. But if you don't have much to say, that's okay too. But it would be great if you could just respond. Hopefully it won't take much time. Sam, did you have anything? You just
I guess what I'm puzzling over is just the timeline of it. So if we're in prototype or pilot, or what the expectation is for our transition from prototype to pilot to final, if there's an idea of that.
Yeah, and thank you for that too, because sometimes a prototype might end up looking a lot like what the pilot looks like. So I'm not saying it needs to be like for yours. You might validate a lot of the assumptions that you have so far, also because it seems that you've done a lot of, your stakeholders, and you've had that communication back and forth. So it's sort of you've had this iterative mindset leading up to this. So if your prototype, I'm not saying like if your prototype works, it sucks. Yours might look less pivoty than someone else's. I was gonna say Lisa, but you know what I mean? It's just the complexity of what you're doing, or what going in, how early you're testing too, and any of those things could make a difference. And I don't necessarily have any firm expectations from an Ideastarter standpoint of where you need to be this month, but I mean, I'll be checking in with you to see like, are you able to test, or like where are you stuck, sort of like how Sean noted that feeling overwhelmed and sort of like choice paralysis.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't seem like that's where you're at, so I would just say like go forth, and we'll see how far we can get, because part of this is just like an organic response to roadblocks that we don't know might come up based on what we're hearing from either users or backend or whatever.
Got it. Thanks.
Yeah.